We look ahead to Auburn's Week 1 opponent in Umass on today's episode of the Up-Tempo Podcast.
You are now listening to the War Report Podcast Network.
What's up, Auburn family? Welcome back to the Up-Tempo Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dustin Smith. You see my guy down there, Blake Lane, and we are joined today by a special guest, Nathan Strauss. We're going to preview the Week 1 opponent at UMass. Nathan is a play-by-play announcer for Umass Football, so we figured, man, get him in here. Nobody else better, right? He sees them every week. Nathan, how you doing tonight, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys for having me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Blake, you good down there, brother?
Yeah, man. Just got home from the hospital. Welcome the baby boy home, Levi. So we're excited, and I'm glad to talk some UMass football with Nathan here, Dustin.
Yeah,
we've got a Levi and we've got a Strauss. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Blake, want to get us going, brother?
Nathan, I want to get it popping right out the gate, man, and I wanted to kind of fill out where this UMass program is heading towards. I know you guys aren't in a conference right now, and it's been a minute since you've been in one, but I wanted to start things off with, if you had to pick where UMass is headed in the football world, because we all know where D1 football is headed with NIL and all of this crazy things that are happening. But if you had to pick a conference, Nathan, where could UMass potentially end up, or would they even consider joining a conference again?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me. And to sort of understand my connection to the program, I went to UMass. I'm Massachusetts born and raised. Graduated UMass in 2022, and then got hired back by UMass. And I do a lot of broadcasting stuff for them. My boss, Jay Burnham, is the voice of UMass football and basketball. I will fill in doing, sidelines for football, some color stuff, some play-by-play stuff across, hockey, basketball, soccer, whatever opens up, women's hoops, here, there, and everywhere. So I feel a very strong tie to UMass, first of all, even though right now I'm actually in South Carolina, working for the single A affiliate of the Atlanta Braves in Augusta, Georgia. So for all you guys in Braves Nation or Braves country down here, I'm the voice of the Augusta Green Jackets. And I feel like I have to plug, come on out to SRP Park. I've got tickets for you, whatever you need. But to answer your question about where UMass is as a program and what the sort of dream conference fit is, we have this discussion every couple of months on Twitter, on UMass Twitter, and it's something that gets litigated pretty frequently. But I would say a conference like the American, like the AAC, the AAC has expanded generally southward in the last couple of years. But a conference like the AAC, or rejoining the MAC, either for all sports or for football only, which is probably not an option at this point, might be the two sort of biggest comparables. So you need to find an organization where you're not going to be heavily outspent, but pretty much everyone in the UMass community, fans, players, my guess is administration as well, understands the benefits of being in a conference. First of all, it's a path to a bowl game. And even though UMass does have a rights deal with ESPN, just like UConn, who made it to a bowl game last year as an independent, it's pretty hard to find schools that you can beat and who will schedule you as an independent. It's a lot easier if you're, Ball State in the MAC and you say, okay, well, 6 of our games this year, 8 of our games this year at least are against Kent State, Buffalo, Central, Western Michigan, whatever the case may be, because you can't all be having up years. Whereas for UMass, you're scheduling 8 to 10 years in advance. Who knows if Eastern Michigan is going to be having, a bowl caliber season in 2031, or who knows if New Mexico is going to join a conference, or who knows if Liberty is going to somehow suddenly get, hundreds of millions of dollars in investment and have Hugh Freeze at their helm. And, the point is, it's hard being an independent is hard. Being in the Northeast is hard. Being both of them at the same time is extremely difficult, unless you're Army, who obviously have the benefits of being, the U.S. Armed Forces Academy. So there.
Is UMass independent in every sport, or y'all in a conference in other sports?
We are part of the Atlantic 10, the A10, which is particularly well known for being a basketball conference. It used to have schools like Penn State, Virginia Tech, Now it's sort of, UMass, Dayton, St. Joe's, it's Davidson, Steph Curry's alma mater. That's where UMass is at for all other sports. And then our most notable sport is hockey. And we're part of Hockey East, which is the best hockey conference in the country. Many people would say a few people would say otherwise from the Midwest, but it's the best conference in the country. And we were the national champions in 2021 and continue to be one of, if not the best developmental hockey program in the country. So football is obviously the biggest sport in terms of size and money. In terms of success, it's definitely, in the past, men's hoops, and certainly currently it's, women's hoops and hockey.
Nathan, I kind of wanted to go back to the beginning here because when I was doing some research, I found kind of some interesting things on just the story of how UMass got to this point. So correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but you played for 3 FCS national titles and won in 1998. 2011 started making the transition to Division I. 2013 it became official, like y'all were bowl eligible. You could play in bowl games. And then in 2015 something happened with the MAC because when UMass comes in, you join the MAC, and then in 2015 something happened. So kind of what happened? And then as far as when y'all, what was the, I don't want to seem like I'll be a negative here. I'm just trying to figure out exactly, because it seems like you come in and then you're out of the conference pretty quickly, and now you've been independent for a while. So just where's the administration kind of going? What's the future of UMass football from here, and how do we get to this point from the beginning?
Well, so first of all, my understanding is that when that happened, I was still in high school, and I wasn't around for that specific time. But my understanding is that when UMass joined the MAC as a football only option back in the mid 2010s, there was a clause in the contract that gave, I believe, both sides an out after 2 years. So UMass could potentially look to find a different conference or a more suitable all sports conference. And again, I don't know the full details because, you mentioned the national championship game in 98. I was born in 99. It's a lot of my knowledge about the program and its journey has been done, post facto. So it's been backfilling information. And what I do know is, UMass left the MAC, after 2015, after the 2013-14 season, after the 2014-15 season. UMass ended up becoming independent. Around earlier at that time, UMass was playing home games at Gillette Stadium, where the Patriots play. And for understanding, UMass, the flagship Amherst, is located 2 hours to the west of Boston.
Oh, wow.
And so it's Foxborough is located about 45 minutes south of Boston. So it was about 2 hours and 15 minutes to go to and from. And obviously, unless you're a school like Auburn or UGA who can get away with playing at, Mercedes-Benz Stadium because it's an hour and 15 minutes down the road from Athens, a drive that I did yesterday to go to Trader Joe's. It's tricky, to get students to build support in that way. So that's sort of been the legacy of the program. And at that time in the mid 2010s, Mark Whipple was the head coach, who's a pretty famous, or relatively speaking, high profile guy. I believe he's now at Nebraska, following stints at Pitt, I believe. So, and then after that, things got a little complicated. There was a coaching hire that didn't pan out the way it possibly could have.
We can relate
now with Don Brown at the helm.
We can relate.
we can relate, buddy. We just went through that. You mentioned Don Brown. He actually coached at UMass before, right? 04 to 08. I kind of wanted to ask you, what is the pillars of a Don Brown program? What is something that he hangs his hat on? This is one thing we're going to do on Saturdays.
Aggression. The answer is aggression. He's got this famous, saying, "Solve your problems with aggression." It's it's printed on the video room, on the sort of the top of the video room screen. He is all about sort of commitment, intensity, and aggression. And Don Brown is not only a national name, he's had stints at Michigan and Arizona State, amongst others, but he is like a New England football icon. He had time at UMass, he had time at Northeastern, which no longer has a football program. He's a Massachusetts guy, in a sport that really is very much not Massachusetts centric. So he recruited a lot of the top New England prep talent to Michigan when he was there. But as far as what you're going to see on the field, it's very defense oriented. He's got a nickname, Dr. Blitz. And you saw, if you look at some of the results last year, UMass went down to A&M, who obviously were having a down year themselves, but still had one of the most prolific recruiting classes of all time, and with Jimbo Fisher at the helm and countless other famous high-profile analysts, coaches, etc., and held them to 17 points and really, did not give up anything. There was a time in that game at the late stage of the second half when UMass actually was outgaining them by 100 yards on the ground. So you're looking at a program that defensively can compete with just about anyone. And that goes from personnel, but particularly to, the systems at hand. They'll mix it up. They'll show a lot of different fronts, and defense is a priority because when you're trying to evaluate a quarterback, which I'm imagining we'll get to in a little bit, as far as what UMass will do on the other side of the ball, your defense will keep you in games. And the biggest issues for UMass last year, and one of the reasons why the record doesn't necessarily line up with some of the metrics defensively, is that the offense just couldn't stay on the field enough to give the defense breathers. And obviously that really hurts you defensively, especially when you're not all that deep.
Yeah, that'll wear on you as the season goes on.
Nathan, one thing I kind of picked up right there is you were talking about the athletes that UMass is going to look to bring in. How difficult is it going to be to pitch that area to these high school kids and to bring in some big time talent to get this thing flipped around up there?
So I don't know if you guys have you guys ever been to Boston or Massachusetts in the fall?
I have not.
No, sir.
So Amherst, 2 hours west of Boston, is like a picturesque New England college town. It is beautiful. Football season there is just like one of the true delights in the world. You'll get it, in mid-September and October. It'll be, 70, 65 degrees, crisp, cool breeze in the morning, pleasant in the afternoon. The leaves all change. The stadium is, when you look out, it's got this backdrop of foliage, red, orange, yellow leaves. As far as selling Amherst as an area, if you're comparing Amherst to Piscataway, New Jersey, for example, if you're looking at, okay, do I want to go to Rutgers or do I want to go to UMass, which is a pretty common dilemma because Rutgers, is the closest Power 5 school to New England. And they offer a lot of New England talent that UMass is looking at as well. If you're choosing between Rutgers or sort of lower end Power 5 schools, the Rutgers of the world, for example, SEC schools probably excluded at this point, just given where the SEC is. But if you're looking at Rutgers or BYU or a school in the Mountain West, Boise State, it's the Amherst lifestyle is really beautiful. And as a school, as far as academics go, UMass is a good school. It's really up there. It's a top 25, public school in the country. And, it's a really nice area. So it's not a tough sell. And the facilities are very, very good and have gotten a lot of investment. The stadium is one area that UMass lags behind in. It's not the most high tech or even the most new or fresh stadium. But as far as your life as a student athlete, as an athlete at UMass, it's pretty good. And we do have the best dining in the country, famously. That's sort of one thing that UMass really hangs its hat on, is the number one dining. And it's been that way. And as a student who gained 15 to 20 pounds during my time there before I dropped the meal plan my senior year, I can definitely attest to that as well. So look, it's not College Station. It's not Athens. It's not, Tempe, Arizona, but it's got some benefits. It really does.
That's awesome. Dustin, you want to kick off this football talk?
Yeah, dude, let's get into the season this year. So you kind of you talked about the defense last year just not being in the position to win. And I look at it, I see 12.5 points a game from that offense, 131st out of 131 teams. What is the game plan, man? How is UMass going to put some points on the board and help that defense out?
That's a great question. Obviously, you're talking about putting points on the board. It all starts with QB play. And UMass has really revamped the QB room. So also to contextualize last year's team a little bit and sort of why the numbers looked the way it did. Almost a complete, changing of the guard. So in 2020, in 2021. And a little bit before that as well, UMass was led by Walt Bell, who's now the OC at Indiana. It was not a good fit for a number of reasons, and the results really back that up. But with the transfer portal the way it is, and with the changing in coaching staffs, UMass cleaned house, and the players cleaned house as well. And that's sort of a mutual symbiosis that you'll often find when a new coach comes in, especially when you're towards the lower end of the ladder as far as, program prestige goes. So everyone was coming in with pretty much a fresh slate last year. And again, being UMass and scheduling the way UMass does, it's hard to hit the ground running, quite literally, when your personnel has gone through such a change and you've got, a head coach who is very experienced, but again, is working with this group of players for the first time. Not just a head coach, but really an entire, more or less a large portion of the coaching staff. Alex Miller, our O-line coach and a big part of our offense, excluded. He was the interim when Walt Bell left the program by sort of mutual consent, so to speak. So the numbers last year are emblematic of where UMass was talent-wise, but also familiarity-wise, and there's only so much practice you can do to get better. Part of that learning has to come in games. And there were a number of games last year that UMass was in till the very end. Eastern Michigan, Arkansas State, for example, were, UMass against Arkansas State came down to a goal line stop. UMass had a chance to take that game to OT or even win it with 2. So some of the numbers, obviously not great, but what UMass did do is get a bunch more quarterbacks. And that's the big thing. So our day one starter last year, Gino Campiotti, was a JUCO guy who has now been converted to a tight end. And he was a running QB. The passing numbers weren't great, but a real high character guy. So he's moved out of the quarterback room. And the rest of our reps really went to Brady Olson, who was a younger guy and struggled a little bit. He's still on the roster. But the big names are Carlos Davis, who was an FCS transfer brought in from Western Carolina, who had real good numbers down there with the, I believe they're the Chanticleers as well, or maybe the Mountaineers of Western Carolina. I know Coastal's the Chanticleers, so probably the Mountaineers. We'll go with that. No, they're the Catamounts. Got it.
Catamount.
Yeah, they're the SoCon. I know a little bit about the SoCon. Yeah.
Yeah. So he is part of the QB room, and he's a fifth-year guy, so someone who's really experienced at running an offense. And the other guy, the bigger name, is Tyson Pomachan, who began his career at Clemson as sort of the heir apparent to DJ Ugalele.
Yeah.
Something like that.
He's now at Oregon, I believe, but it didn't pan out there. He went to Georgia Tech, and he now is at UMass and is not only a high-profile name, but also someone who does have playing experience for real at Clemson and Tech. It's different than bringing in someone who has been a true backup or a third string at a P5. It's someone who has, legitimate experience, and that kind of quarterback poise is not something that UMass has had in a decade, and certainly not last year whatsoever. So figuring out who wins that battle, which I'm imagining we're going to get a good idea of because UMass plays week 0 out in Las Cruces, is going to be a good indicator of how UMass is going to play. But pro style offense, most likely. My guess, I don't have any information whatsoever, is I think Pomachan is probably the guy with the highest ceiling. Davis is the one with the most experience, but between those two, and also a really talented freshman, Ahmed Hassan, who's thought of as being the future at QB in this program, those are the guys who will likely be involved in some way.
Nathan, I want to look outside at the receiver position or even in the backfield, man. What are some of the names that could possibly make a big play against Auburn, or if it gets tight late, could end up stealing something in Jordan-Hare for UMass?
Well, it's going to be really interesting because UMass had Ellis Merriweather, who's now a member of the, I believe he's with the Packers. He signed a 2-year deal there this last offseason as an undrafted guy. He was a real workhorse, sort of bell cow back for UMass. And it's going to be interesting to see who ends up, carrying that as far as carrying that weight, so to speak, from the backfields. And again, it could be, by committee, depending on, who is where. And that's just something that we're not going to know necessarily until after that first week worth of games. But as far as running backs go, It's Kayron Adams is a guy who carried a lot of weight last year as well. I'm imagining he could easily start, at running back in that first game. It also could be, Zamar Wise is someone who was a quarterback and then has now been converted into like an all-purpose wide receiver, sometimes a slot guy, sometimes in the backfield. We'll see how they use him this year. And Greg DeWozier, who's our kickoff return man, he is someone who could, end up in the backfield in a more prominent role as well. We also brought in Jalen John from Arizona, who could very easily become a big part of this as well. And that's going to be the big question. I think we might just have to wait and see, which is kind of a dumb answer to this question. But when you're turning over as many guys as UMass is, and losing high character guys to, professional ranks, you're going to bring in some new faces as well. And we'll see how Coach Kasul and everyone else, dials them up.
Yeah, I think that's the crazy thing about college football today, college sports, honestly, is the turnover and the transfer portal and constantly seeing new faces and everything. Dustin, I know you had a couple questions that you wanted to ask on both sides of the ball.
Well, I didn't know that y'all had I didn't know that UMass had the week 0 opponent. So who is that exactly? And then how important do you think that is to get that week 1 opponent before you go face, obviously, a big time opponent in Auburn?
Yeah, so UMass is at New Mexico State in a game that's actually on ESPN, which is a pretty awesome way to start off the year, I think, for players, for fans, especially because like Amherst, Massachusetts to Las Cruces, New Mexico, it's not exactly direct flight territory. I will still be with the Green Jackets at that time. I'll be with them for the first couple of weeks of the season. But it's really important to have that. I think, look, let's be honest about the purpose of UMass playing Auburn as well. The bye game, and UMass football brings in a lot of money through these games. UMass played at A&M last year, playing at Penn State this year, for example. Part of the purpose is financial, and that's the way it is. And even though UMass has given programs like A&M, Georgia, Tennessee games in the past, in the last decade or so, competing is what you want. Right. And it's also an opportunity for players to see these games on the schedule and think, man, I got to compete, in Auburn. How great is that? I get to compete in College Station. I get to compete in Happy Valley. Like it's different. So that's why those games exist. And, it's UMass obviously, and Don Brown will say we want to win every game because you have to believe you want to win every game.
Yeah.
But if you lose by 20, and it's important to note, UMass has never not covered against an SEC opponent. Every single game for UMass is covered. So if I had to guess, Vegas is going to look at that game right now and think, wow, Auburn minus 38.5, if not more than that. And also, Hugh Freeze has seen UMass a good number of times because UMass played Liberty every year in the last 5 years or so. But yeah.
So that is a great piece of information, Nathan, because we here at the War Report Network are actually about to start doing a little gambling thing, a little gambling pod and everything, talking about the best liners, maybe best locks of the week and everything. So that little week 1 right there, UMass, you might be onto something. Take the points with the Minutemen.
Well, I mean, it just depends. It depends on how UMass looks week 1. And I want to just put out there for legal reasons, as someone who does work with UMass athletics, I cannot offer any endorsement of of gambling, of anything like that. I was obviously bringing it up for purely statistical reasons, and also to illustrate the fact that UMass has played up pretty well. You look at UMass's schedule last year, and the big losses were not to the biggest opponents out there. And when UMass did play A&M, it was a much closer game than many, Vegas included, would have expected. So I think UMass, if UMass comes out and UMass is 8.5-point dogs week 1 on the road in New Mexico, and or New Mexico State rather, if UMass comes out and wins that game, which they could, UMass really could, it could be interesting. And the big thing with UMass is like a couple of different breaks, and every program could say this, but like, a couple of different breaks, different special teams, a recovered fumble, and you see a couple of results. You go from having one win in each of the last couple of years to 2 or 3. So, and it might not seem like much, but it's double or triple what is on the record now. So,
for sure. When you talk about UMass playing up, and then you talk about the mentality of the coach just showing up and fighting, how much is that indicative of the team playing up to the head coach's personality? We're going into these big opponents and we're not scared.
That's exactly it. UMass really recruits guys who have that kind of personality, I think, in general. And to a certain extent, that is what Don Brown is. To be successful at a school in New England from a footballing perspective, it requires a little bit of that grit and a willingness to compete when, Massachusetts as a state is a lovely place to live, but the athletics funding is not comparable to what you get at big state schools in the Midwest or in the South. And conferences aside, because obviously that plays a big part in it, you are fighting an uphill battle, and you have to be committed and willing as a player, as a coach, and as a fan as well. And certainly someone who tries to straddle that boundary a little bit as a member of the broadcast department and media, because obviously I want these teams to do well. It's my alma mater. I don't think it's a bad thing, but
no, don't apologize for it.
I think it's really encouraging to see how UMass has played up in those circumstances. So UMass plays, Penn State and Auburn this year. Going back to last year, the big game was, at A&M. That was obviously important. 2021 was a bit of a different story. You started off the season at Pitt. You played a school like Boston College, who, I misspoke, by the way, is the closest Power 5 school to New England, but for reasons of its own, slipped my mind. But yeah, it's the guys like playing up, and Don Brown really fires them up. If you just look up a clip on UMass Football's in Twitter or Instagram or whatever, look up a clip of how he coaches these guys in practice. And if you're not running through a wall or ready to at that point, give yourself a check, because he will get the guys going. If you look at him and aren't immediately fired up, this man will absolutely freaking bring it, So
love that.
Something else you said that interested me was when we were talking about UMass playing Auburn, and you mentioned it's just important for these kids to come to say that they got the opportunity to play in Jordan-Hare. And I want you to speak on that, and then maybe how much that paycheck helps UMass athletics as a whole, because there are a lot of guys, Nathan, that we have to hear as Auburn fans, because we play New Mexico State as well right before we play Alabama. And there's a lot of guys out there looking at you, big game boomer, that say these SEC teams schedule these small schools, and it's not they come at us for it. They say, well, this is a cupcake. And we're always sitting here saying, well, these programs survive off of these type of games. So just how important is that paycheck to UMass athletics, and for these kids that are probably never going to get to go play in a big time game, to say, hey man, I got to compete in the SEC stadium on a Saturday night.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, I think a lot of the players that UMass has brought in do have experience in these environments, especially the higher profile transfers who played at Arizona or Arizona State or Rutgers or, Georgia Tech and Clemson, for example. And a lot of these guys, as elite athletes in high school as well, were playing in big time environments. But, only 98 people can play for Auburn each year or Michigan each year, And I think most guys, obviously, that's something to aspire to, but you still find good environments everywhere. And so as impressive as the environments are, at A&M, for example, last year, or at Penn State and stuff, I think college football is really valuable because each school kind of shows out in a different way. One of my favorite environments last year was actually playing at at Toledo, rather, in the evening. They packed their stadium, which is it's a MAC school, and they packed it out. And it was very, it's just as valuable, I think, for the players on both teams as playing at a school like Auburn. And I think that's something that I think you have to sort of learn as a UMass fan, and probably as a player as well. But as far as the check goes, and as far as what it means, I think the fee is something like $2 million. I know A&M paid us more like $3 million last year. But UMass, all but 15 to 20 different schools in the country, runs a deficit for its football program. I believe that only 16 to 20 programs in the country turn a profit, and they are the schools that you would expect. Right. And so it's important that, as far as football goes, that money that gets brought in helps fund things like travel for our Olympic sports. Yep. For example, not being part of a conference where you don't get a conference check for football means that you do rely a little bit on subsidies, and not subsidies as in Auburn and the AD believe they owe UMass, to keep this program afloat, because that's not really how the relationships work. But there's benefits to Auburn playing these games as well, especially because you're scheduling these are scheduled 8 to 10 years in advance. Every team needs bye games, and UMass is, they are an opponent and they'll give you a game. And obviously it's not going to be, you don't want to be Michigan last year, right? You don't want to be Michigan last year and schedule cupcakes, but also you can't plan that far ahead, because who knows if UMass, when you guys scheduled this game in 2016, 2017, if UMass joins the American or gets an invite to, the MAC again or something, where UMass would be at that time. And I'm sure plenty of schools found that out about Liberty the hard way in the last couple of years too.
Arkansas,
as much as I hate to give, that program a lot of props, I'm sure, and so I'm sure UConn last year surprised some teams who scheduled them as well. Yeah. So like, that's part of the game. And so Auburn fans, I think ideally can look at this and say, wow, we didn't know that much about UMass going in. What an awesome, dedicated group of supporters and fans who support this program, knowing that being a 4-win team is like the absolute best case scenario this year. And how awesome is it that college football can be so, entertaining and can bind all of us together, when the programs, the places could not be more disparate. When you're drawing 20K and not 90K, but they're just as passionate, and if that's a little patronizing, so be it. But it is an accurate reflection of like we are just as strong and committed fans as other programs would be, just different circumstances,
Yeah. Nathan, like you just mentioned, that UMass is they're going to be the underdog, obviously, coming down to Jordan-Hare, and it might be a big underdog. Who knows, man? But what can UMass do coming to Jordan-Hare to maybe pull off an upset? Who knows? That's the beauty of college football, right? We've seen it in the past, plenty of times, and we've seen an App State going into the big house, and it can happen, right? So what has to happen for this UMass team to potentially pull off a huge upset?
I mean, hope they go for a field goal in a late game situation, run it back, or just kidding. Sorry.
Go kick sixes.
Yeah. I'm just kidding. As soon as I knew I was coming on here, I was like, I have to make the reference at least once.
There you go.
No, I think first of all, it's keep your offense on the field. It's avoid 3 and outs, because even if you just move the sticks one time, that's 5 extra minutes of oxygen that's going into your DBs, right? And it keeps them better prepared to try and shut down, try and keep Auburn from moving the chains. That's one. One way that UMass really excelled last year was in takeaways. UMass really won the turnover battle a lot of the time on defense alone. Interceptions and fumbles was another situation for the offense. But again, it's UMass is going to build. If UMass is going to be close in this game and keep this game close, it's going to be on the defense. But the offense is going to be a big part of why their defense can function the way it does. So if you can get 14 points from your offense, if you can get good QB play and maybe rip off one big gain, I think it would go a long way. And obviously, as every underdog knows, take care of the ball. You just can't, when you're a big underdog, you can't be sloppy. You can't give the home favorite team playing in front of a big crowd at Jordan-Hare, you can't give them field position. You can't give them, the margin of error is so slim. You can't kick off out of bounds. Like you got to win. You got to win at least 1.5 of the 3 phases, and it's going to be harder to do that on offense than the other 2. So if you can win, or at least be competitive in special teams and win the defensive battle, like that'll get you pretty close. In theory, well, pretty close, relatively speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. Dustin, you got anything?
Yeah, Nathan, you had said You kind of alluded to it a second ago. You said 4 wins would be the best case scenario. So just kind of looking ahead at UMass's season here, what has to happen? But I want UMass to make a bowl game. After talking to you, I'm pulling for UMass, bro. How does UMass make a bowl game this year?
So let's look at last year's schedule first, and to understand sort of what happened. So UMass beat Stony Brook, an FCS team, in the only win of the year, 20-3, early season, first home game of the year. Then they went to Temple, and it was scoreless, I believe, at halftime, and then ended up losing 28-0. Offense had nothing, ran out of gas, whatever. Next week, you lose by a touchdown to Eastern Michigan in a game that they were in until the very final stages of that game. Then the wheel sort of fell off. Big losses to Liberty, big loss to Buffalo, both of them at home. And then, a close-ish loss to New Mexico State, a big loss to UConn at Stores or in Hartford, Connecticut. And then, the big one, which was the 2-point loss to Arkansas State in a game that UMass really easily could have won with a couple of bounces. You think about it, UMass lost their QB in the Eastern Michigan game, and then ended up struggling offensively, as you would expect in a one touchdown game. And UMass, was a 2-point conversion away from, taking Arkansas State to overtime. And then, the blowout loss to Army that followed was, sort of par for the course. But the depth that UMass has this year is much better than it was last year. And that's part of it. When you are at the bottom, it's not only the top level guys on your program who are having to play up, it's also the rest of your program. And UMass really did not have the depth to compete at the level that they wanted to last year. And it's not an excuse, but it's certainly a factor when you think about how guys get injured over the course of the year. When you lose, if you've got 6 starting quality O linemen and 3 of them go down, that means you're going to be operating with 2 guys who are filling in who just aren't there yet. And that's why this year, if you have 10 guys who could start and are pushing each other, maybe you fare a little better when other guys go down. So looking at this year, New Mexico State, winnable game. Auburn, not a winnable game on the surface, obviously. Miami, Eastern Michigan, schools in the MAC you can be competitive against. New Mexico, winnable game at home. Arkansas State, winnable game at home. Toledo at home, probably not winnable because they've got a tremendous QB in Fitz, who is really, really good. And they diced UMass up last year with a dual threat QB. And who knows? That's a tough game. Then you follow that up with a trip to Penn State. That's not a winnable game. Army, who knows what Army is going to look like this year without the triple option, right? That's sort of their big change. Army is one of those things where it's like on paper, you'd expect to be competitive. But again, if they're keeping the defense out for 10 minutes a quarter because of the triple option, that's where, they even passed against UMass last year. So who knows there, right? And then you come back, you play Merrimack, FCS at home. That has to be a win. That is the only game that you look at the schedule and say, this is a must-win game. Anything else, and heads start to roll. And then you wrap up the season with, at Liberty, which who knows what they will be like this year. But again, probably a game that you're not super competitive in, just based on, Liberty will probably be playing for a bowl game at that point, admittedly with new leadership and different talent. But that's probably a game that's not a schedule loss, because nothing is in college football, as you know, but that's probably a tough one. And then wrapping up the season with a rivalry game, there's a name for it, UMass and UConn. If you don't know the name for it, look up UMass UConn football rivalry. When you put the letter C that UConn rocks with, combined with the U and M of UMass, as the networks do when they promote the game, it's called the Cum Bowl. That is very much not an official title, as much as many folks online wish that it would be. But it is as close to an Iron Bowl as you get for UMass and UConn, and obviously 2 schools that are independent, 2 of the 4 that are independent. That could have some implications depending on how that goes. And the indications are, and I say this, it is at Gillette Stadium, which is a great spot because it's Thanksgiving weekend. and UMass has a huge alumni base in Boston, and that's a pretty easy sell to go to Gillette Stadium, and UConn as well, huge New England alumni base. So you're looking at this schedule and you're saying, okay, say we win against Merrimack, which is a given, and then we win against one of the New Mexico teams. So New Mexico State on the road or New Mexico at home, both of whom are also graded in the bottom 15 in the country. There's 2 wins. Now, can you sneak a win from Miami, Eastern Michigan, Arkansas State, one of those 3, or maybe Miami, Eastern Michigan, Arkansas State, or Toledo? Can you sneak 1 win from those 4 or 2 wins from the 5, including Army? That gets you to 2 to 3 wins. And then you win against UConn in your rivalry game, and then you're at 4-8. It's a milestone high for the program in the last decade, and you've got some building blocks going forward. You know, the best case crazy scenario is, you know, Liberty loses a bunch of guys and you go down to Lynchburg and knock them off, or maybe you win against Eastern Michigan, who UMass was really competitive with last year. Maybe you win against them at home, and then you also beat Arkansas State, who UMass was close against last year. Now you're at 3 wins with late season games against an FCS school in UConn. Can you get to 5? And if you're thinking idealistically, if you can get to 5, all you need is a couple bounces in one of your bye games or a schedule loss, and then all of a sudden you're at 6. But no UMass fan is going to come out and say that 6 wins next season is doable, or even think about that. Like, you do that, they're building the statue. So I think realistically, you know, I want to say, I'll look this up right now. UMass football win total Vegas. I want to say it's probably at like 2.5. Yeah. So UMass is it's over 2.5 plus 110, over 2 is minus 160. And then, so basically Vegas thinks UMass is going to get somewhere between 2 and 2.5 wins, with 3 sort of pushing it. And so I think if you beat that, if you go 3-9, you're happy. 4 wins, you are very, very happy.
Last year, you only won 1 game, right? Plus 110, over 2.5, right? Let's hammer that over 2.5, right? Let's hammer it, all right?
Let's UMass.
Yeah. I want UMass to get to that 4-win mark.
Yeah, I mean, assuming one of those is not down at Auburn, right?
But yeah, you can't. You can't have that one. Can't have that one, Nathan.
And for the record, you brought this up earlier, but App State is the perfect example of what I would love to see UMass be. Get into a conference that is not a high major, but certainly a mid-major football conference, right? With all sports as well. You pull off a couple of upsets. You have you get the right coach in, and you win a couple of big games, and then you're playing in a high-profile bowl. You know, Boone, North Carolina is very similar to Amherst, Massachusetts. I know this because I drove through Boone literally 4 days ago. And it's beautiful towns. The sell is on the town itself. You know, it's very different from what you would get in a more city-based school like a Toledo, you know, or a Houston in the American. But like, that would be the dream. And maybe you get a big donor, and all of a sudden you've got a new stadium. You get $50 million worth of stadium donations. You're like, wow, we're building this. And then you find, like, winning begets winning, especially in college sports more than anywhere else. Guys want to play for a winning program. Guys play to win, because if you can't win, why bother playing? And so UMass, for the last 5 years or so, has been stuck in this rut of, how do we take that first step? Because, I mean, everyone will be honest, like, it's been a tough watch at times. You know, the first game I ever broadcast at UMass, I was the engineer and studio host for a football game against I believe it was the Southern Illinois Salukis. Does that sound right? Or Northern Illinois Salukis?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And they came into UMass and won by 30 as an FCS school. And I was like, okay, this is where we're at. And so there has been growth, as hard as it can be to see from the outside and even from the inside sometimes. So again, if you're an Auburn fan, if you're a fan of a Power 5 school who get bored one weekend and are like, hey, I wish I had a sicko team to support. Like, you know, sickos committee is all over us for good reason. Like, come on, like, join the fun. Like we're fun. There might be some differences ideologically, whatever the case may be, but like, there's no harm in, like, I will fully admit that I really enjoy watching. I really enjoyed watching Georgia last year. I really enjoyed watching, Tennessee pre-injury. Like, it's just fun to watch, and I think that there can be fun in the other direction as well once you get used to it.
Love that. Well, Nathan, before we let you go, man, we always kind of end our episodes with a final thought. You can talk about anything. You can bring up anything. Dustin usually wraps it up, but we're going to let you bring up anything you want, man, that's going on, and we're going to give you the floor.
Does it have to be like, do you want it to be like UMass and college sports related, or can it be?
Man, if you want to highlight anything, a charity or whatever, or anything that is on your mind, brother, you can go away and talk about it.
Yeah, I think that what I would use my time to say is that, I think it's important when fans of big schools and fans of schools that have really big athletic departments, they recognize that, if things go wrong, or if UMass were to win a game or get close in a game, it is an uphill battle that I think we fight as a state school, and as a state school that competes in a different stratosphere than a lot of the bigger opponents that we play. Mm-hmm. And that affects everything from, obviously the salaries for coaches, the size of our coaching staff. I mean, you look at Nick Saban's analysts, and they're guys who are getting paid more than the highest paid state employee in the state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So that's like one thing. And then you look at, what UMass is able to do off the field in terms of content production. Like, we have a really great content team that is doing amazing Power 5 level work with maybe a quarter of the resources and a quarter of the people. Going to Texas A&M, where they have 8 SIDs working the game, just as comms people and not as like scrambling around to do other sort of game day stuff. It opens your eyes a little bit to how much certain schools are able to do with a lot less. And a lot of it comes down to money. A lot of it comes down to, climate and sort of support from the state, support from the institution, et cetera, et cetera. But just recognize that, like, we're all trying to do our best. And if things go wrong, if things are different, like, we're trying. And it's I really do think a rising tide carries all ships, higher pay for your creative staff, more people hired for creatives. Everyone deserves to be able to make a living doing this and covering, sports they love, and producing content and getting the program out there. Just support them, give them a retweet, embed their video and tag them, like, tag these guys. Don't just steal their content. Like, that's what I would say. Just like, be considerate of the people who are grinding it out in this industry for $40K a year, and trying to, basically make the experience as a fan as good as possible. That's what I would say. And if that's whiny, so be it. But and that extends, support your podcasts, support the people who are providing other coverage of the sport, who aren't working for, big papers or big companies. Like, there's value in all of this, right? So that's what I would say.
That's great stuff, Nathan. And I want to give a shout out to my guy, Logan Carney. When I first started this podcast, he was kind of telling me, like, hey man, in the afternoons, like, I would love to record, but I'm also like an Uber Eats driver. And he's like, so like, I'd have to record doing that also. And I'm like, okay, well, he was on the beat with West Virginia at the time. And we were talking about the backyard brawl last year and everything, like that wild game and everything that happened in it. And he come on to preview West Virginia's season while he was on an Uber Eats delivery. And I was like, dude, this is so cool. Like, just doing it. And he kind of told me of, like, how guys even at West Virginia, like, they don't get the pay that other people get, and like, he has to go do things like that and everything. And it was just the grind, and then he follows up inside of the Steelers stadium and does an interview with me right after the backyard brawl gets done. It was phenomenal. He's a great dude, and he's a grinder, and I love his work up there. But yeah, I had to shout that out real quick. Nathan, we're going to wrap this thing up, man. You were great. We loved hearing about UMass, and we just can't wait to have you guys down here on the plains, brother.
I'm so excited. I'm so sad I won't be there. It's the last home series of the year for me with the Green Jackets, but I'm sure you guys will be super welcoming. And again, it's one of those situations where like we can all understand like the game matters more than just the final score. And so I'm excited for the fans who get to make that trip as well, because I hear Auburn's a beautiful place to be in the summer, or in the late summer, early fall.
It'll feel like the summer, trust me.
Yeah. Well, everybody, we will leave you with a War Damn Eagle, like always, and we will catch y'all on Friday's episode. We're out.